Hello and welcome to our webcast. Today our subjects are time and money. What time you should spend and what you should do to improve your personal finances. And none of us, it seems, really are doing enough. Scottish Widows have published their second annual Priorities of Life Index. It doesn't make good reading. 17 million Britons admit neglecting their financial well-being. Of these, 1 in 5 say their debt levels are too high to feel financially secure. And 19 million people say savings aren't high enough up their own agendas. So, what can we do to improve it? Well, we have two experts with us in the studio today. Ian McGowan is Head of Savings and Investments at Scottish Widows. And sitting beside me here is Annie Shaw, personal finance journalist and editor of cashquestions.com. Welcome to both of you. Hello. What we need, of course, is your questions. So you can, on the screen, find the place to write them in. Send them to us, and I will put them to our experts here. But let's kick the whole thing off with a question of my own, which is, OK, today I've got an hour to spare, unusual. What should I do? What 3 things should I do to make my finances better? Ian, you first.
Well, first of all, an hour's not enough. It's not going to get you a financial plan, which is what you're aiming for. The good news is people realise they need to spend more time on this. 17% of people in our research said if they have an extra day for an extra day for their priorities of life, they would carry out some financial planning. So what can you do in an hour? I would say first of all, look at areas of your finances that are worrying you. Do you have debts that are expensive? Address them. Secondly, what are you spending your money on that you might just pare back a little bit on? Are there areas that you can save a bit of money? And thirdly, with that saving, can you go and save and invest for the future? As I say, an hour's not a long time, but it's a start.
All right, Annie, what would you do with your hour?
I think Ian's point about the debt and anything that's worrying you in your finances is really the top one, because a lot of people, when they start to really get a bit rocky with their finances, they then start to ignore what's happening, and then it gets worse and worse. If there's anything that's worrying you, address it. Then you may be able to do things like switch your credit card, switch your fuel to cut down on expenses. But also, if you're having real problems, go and get help from somebody, a debt counsellor. Go and talk to your mortgage lender, whoever that is. So that's really important to address your financial problems. Then I think start thinking about ambitions that you have. That with lots of things that we never get round to doing, like this thing about pension saving, or even just getting a little nest egg together for that holiday or whatever. Start thinking about ambitions. And then some people are quite lucky in that they have actually done things like started savings plans in the past. They've got an old account or something and they've forgotten about it. So I'd say use a bit of time to go through and review what you've got. You might be surprised to find you've got more. Look for lost accounts and then make sure you're getting the best rates of interest on your savings. So do a bit of housekeeping
Could
there.
be that statement down the back of the drawer.
It could be, yes.
Well, we've got lots of questions coming in. Please do send your questions coming through. Let's start off with this one from Anne. Anne says, I've got over £50,000 coming from ISAs and other accounts that were held by my late husband. Where would you suggest that I invest or save it without having to tie it up for more than 2 to 3 years? Ian.
The time horizon is really important here. We don't know much about the question or circumstances, of course, but with a short-term time horizon, traditionally you don't want to take many risks with your money. You invest it in something that's readily accessible. That tends to be cash. Now, maybe it's not an all or nothing question. Maybe there are some of that saving that could be perhaps invested for the longer term. It's not all or nothing. I think the final point I make here, though, is seek help. It is a reasonable sum of money. It's one that most people probably need a bit of help figuring out what best to do with it. Seek financial advice.
OK, Annie, what would you do with that kind of money?
I'd agree with that on that kind of sum, because you really want to be getting. It's not just really a matter of just finding a savings account. There may be, if you're kind of looking maybe for an income from that money, or you're going to spend it on something in future, you need to have a bit of a plan for it, and you could get help with that. If you're doing it yourself, there are things. There are plans with fixed rates for the longer term, which give you a higher rate of interest than you would get just for easy access. For easy access, you're probably going to lose a bit on the interest, but maybe use a comparison site, shop around and look and see your best rates. But I would take advice on something which is a fairly substantial sum.
OK, well, let's take another question. Mrs. Morley has sent us this one. She says, is it a more prudent investment to transfer my standalone stakeholder pension to an ISA? She says, I've been paying £25 a month for the past 10 years. Not sure if I'm doing enough to make the most of what I can afford now. Now, Ian, that goes to the heart of it, apart from the detail. It's if you're doing enough to make the most of what you've got now. And of course, the problem is also, I suppose, taking money away from other things.
Yeah. To answer the question, you can't transfer the proceeds of a stakeholder pension to an ISA. You know, pensions money is locked away. You use it in due course. You can get a tax-free lump sum with part of the pension pot. Traditionally, you invest the rest to buy an annuity. You use it over time to fund your retirement. So I think the question is, first of all, do you keep contributing to the stakeholder pension? Do you contribute instead to an ISA? I think the first question for me is, can you afford to save a little bit more? It's not an awful lot to be saving. If, for example, there was a way to continue that saving into the stakeholder pension, but to look at opportunity to save more, and then it's about ambition. What are you saving for? Is it more towards your retirement? Are there shorter term savings objectives? Quite a lot in that question, of course.
And we're getting into the area of pensions there, which is interesting. I mean, Annie, let me bring you in on this one, because Dave has put his message in saying, I have 3 pension schemes. One from previous employer, one Scottish Widows from 20 years self-employment that was stopped after I took employment 12 years ago in local government education. So Dave says, should I consider transferring all my pensions into one scheme? And he says he was born in 1956, because we need to know the age, I guess. Is it good to consolidate?
You can't possibly say, and that is really, really important, that it is not something you can really do yourself and you can make a decision on. It sounds very appealing to put everything in one place, and indeed it might be. That might be the best thing to do. But the point is, you can't possibly tell just from a question like that. And you really need an advisor there who is going to go through each of the plans and make sure that you see what you're getting from the existing plans and whether it would be an advantage for you to move them. With some older pension plans, there are guaranteed annuity rates on them. You definitely wouldn't want to be moving one of those and shutting it down, because you'd be giving up an awful lot. So, you know, the answer to that one might be definitely not. But then again, if one of the plans is getting a poor return, it might be a good idea to consolidate. And if you do consolidate, you may be up for lower charges for having a bigger sum with one provider. Not an easy question to answer, so I would advise this correspondent to seek advice if that's what he's planning.
Well, I'll bowl a difficult question to Ian, because I'm sure you'd like to come in on that, but it is difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, and this is one area of financial planning you don't want to do yourself. You'll miss something. It's a false economy to do it yourself. You might save a few £100, but it's a false economy. Get it done right and get to the right decision on it.
OK, a question's come in now from John, who's 24. He says he's got a full-time job, but he's strapped for cash. And I think there may be quite a few people in that position. And John says, when should I start saving for my retirement? Ian?
As soon as possible is the answer. There's always some caveats there. I mentioned a little while ago that if you have, for example, expensive debt, that has to be the priority. Realistically, somebody of that age, their earnings...
It's quite young, isn't it? 24, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, certainly we would advocate trying to start before age 30. It's great if you can start early, even if it's just a few quid a week. But realistically, somebody of that age might not be at their highest earnings in their lifetime. They may have debts to pay off. But what I would advocate is getting into the discipline of saving at that point. Try and figure out where you can maybe cut back your spending by a few quid. Get into the discipline of saving early. Save early. Your saving works harder through to retirement, and then add to it as you see fit, as you can afford it.
So, Annie, it's the time question almost, isn't it? Get down there, sort it out quite early as you can.
Well, I would say so. I mean, I take all Ian's points on there that young people think their retirement's a really long way off, and perhaps it's not their first priority, or they think it's not their first priority. Discipline is hugely important. The other thing you should remember is that if you're going into an employer's scheme, you very likely will be getting an employer's contribution into the scheme. So that's basically free money. It's like a pay rise. You get tax relief on your savings in a pension plan. So actually it may not be as expensive as you think it's going to be. Now, the next thing you can do is actually just start saving with a very small amount. And one of the kind of sneaky tricks you can do to really boost your pension is what you do is you say, right, I can only afford this little tiny bit now, but what I'll do is I'll put next year's pay rise towards my pension. In other words, if I get a 10% pay rise or 5% pay rise, whatever it is, I will put that into my pension savings. So in other words, the amount you're putting in is sneaking up, but really you're not really noticing it on your own because you've adjusted your spending to what your monthly income is. So the pay rise would have been nice, you know, maybe a nice holiday, but then again, maybe that could make you help you to save towards your retirement without even noticing it. So I would say go as early as possible if you can, particularly if there's some free money from the boss.
And also, of course, the important thing in all this is to keep an eye on all this and be aware of it. Now, we've had a question in from Roberts who says, is there an online system where you can check and update your pensions or other services that you have? I mean, is there an efficient way of doing that? I mean, you're from Scottish Widows. Does it work with that?
Yeah, and it's a question for the pension provider, but the answer is almost certainly yes. The pension provider will generally, or any savings provider will generally send you an annual statement so you're keeping on track. But it's good to engage with your savings, be it a pension or otherwise. To go online and have a look at it is important. I would warn you not to get obsessed with how that moves on a day-to-day basis. It's a long-term investment. But the important thing is keep a track of it. Are you on track in meeting your financial objectives? Is the pension going to pay you what you wish in retirement to maintain your lifestyle? And if it's not, try and pay more in. The only way you do that is if you keep track and you engage with your plan.